So hi, this is Saintus and welcome back to Forge of Empires. Now today we're going to be discussing the ages in Forge of Empires, more specifically the great buildings, their units, and how easy they are overall to get through. Now I must mention something, which is that the earliest ages, uh, basically I played in those ages many years ago, and they were very different from what they are now. As a matter of fact, today they are incredibly easy to get through. As a matter of fact, I would say it would only take you 4 months at most to get through the first, let's say, 10 ages. But anyway, let's just dive more specifically into each of that age. Starting with the Bronze Age, it's fairly minimalistic. As a matter of fact, it's just an extension of the tutorial, in my opinion. You have a very small continent map, just these four provinces, with only one expansion, not that much room for you. Uh, and as for the buildings, they are all very simple, except for the blacksmith. That is everyone's choice regarding production buildings for event missions. But beyond that, there isn't any building worth mentioning. Also, the units are all pretty standard, except for the spear fighter, which requires you only like 20 seconds to recruit, unlike any the other units. So it's very useful early on, at least for you. You can just keep losing those units and learning how to fight it. That's how I say it. Um, and as for the grid buildings, I've covered this in some earlier videos, but Statue of Zeus is a building you should definitely go for, and Tower of Babel is a building you should not go for. Anyway, moving on to the Iron Age. This is where you essentially complete that extension of the tutorial. This is because of the features. You can see this first because of the continent map, which is much larger. It's in standard size. You have two expansions as usual. You also have two deposits and some extra rewards. And this is what you'll face throughout the next 5 to 7 ages. As for the buildings themselves, also pretty standard. Same thing for the production buildings. As for the units, however, I must mention the archery range. It's very small at 2x2. It's incredibly useful, especially for GVG. I don't fight them, but I've known many people who say that they are quite useful, and it's definitely their choice for the Iron Age. And finally, as for the great buildings, and the Colosseum is definitely a no-go, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria is something you should only go for early on in the game, and you should just demolish it later on. However, as for the features that you gain access to, I'm just going to show you here in the technology tree. We look at the Bronze Age and Iron Age, you can see that in the Bronze Age you have access to events, also the Friends, Tavern, guilds, whatever, but you also in the Iron Age gain access to the Guild Expedition, where you can farm diamonds, cultural settlements that give you access to tremendously great buildings, and also PvP fights. It means you can finally get attacked by neighbors and attack them, so you might want to start to think, just bring aside a few units for your defensive army. But anyway, moving on to the early Middle Ages. As you can see, you have a fairly standard continent map. However, I should mention that you have access to this bonus provinces that offer you, I think, diamonds right up in the end, and a building with defense bonus, which, to be honest, isn't that valuable considering that your defensive army is something you should never focus on. But anyway, as for the buildings, everything is again pretty standard except for this multi-story house. Essentially, this used to be a premium building. You would research it in a tech tree, like any other technology. However, the building itself will require diamonds to be constructed. And I guess they decided that it was not worth it for you to have something that costed diamonds so early on, because everyone will just get passed through those ages and evolve very quickly. So they just made it a standard building regarding costs. However, it still only takes 20 seconds to build, and it offers more people than the best residential building in the Iron Age. So it's something I definitely recommend for you to do, at least if you need a population. You should upgrade it right up to the multi-story house, because it's really early on in the age and it only takes you 20 seconds to build. Really useful. The production buildings are all standard. The units, most of them are, except for the mounted archer. In this case, it is basically this archer that, because it's on horse, it has a much higher mobility, and for the first time you have the ability to strike enemy units on your first turn. As for the great buildings, um, you should definitely build both of them. However, the Cathedral of Aachen, because it's a military building, you should build them as quickly as possible. As for the Hagia Sophia, because of its massive size and the fact that it's not that efficient with forge points, you should only build it later on in the game. Now moving on to the High Middle Ages. First of all, I must mention that they have a really good looking great city hall. At least back in the day, I love to look at it. But moving on, you have again a fairly standard um, it's not really content, but you have a fairly standard group of provinces to conquer. Again, two expansions, two deposits, and some rewards beyond that. Same thing for the residential buildings, again, pretty standard. The production buildings, on the other hand, I think the farm is the most efficient, and some people really like it. They just build as many farms as possible to get the most supplies as they can out of their city. However, again, in this stage, as I've said in previous videos, you get so many event buildings that supplies. Well, you can satisfy the need for supplies with either event buildings or missions with the chateau. As for the units, they're all pretty standard and nicely packed even. They're all at a 3x3 size, except for the knights over here at 3x4. But anyway, you can very easily manage this. Seeing that they're all the same size, you can just arrange space in your city far better than in other ages. At least, so this is very comfortable for you. Again, very easy to go by. The goods buildings, I should only mention that the ropery, I think that's how it's pronounced, at 3x2 is incredibly small. You can build far more than any other of the goods buildings, at least again, assuming that you don't have enough event buildings. At least that's the advantage that you have in this age, if you get the deposit for rope. And finally, with the great buildings, don't build Notre Dame, ever. Don't build Notre Dame, it's just as beautiful as it might look, it's a complete waste. And the St. Mark's Basilica, in the end, don't build it. I have it in my city, but it's just because I can't let go of it. So because despite the coin boost and the goods production, it's still not a great building you should go for. This is because you can satisfy the goods with event buildings and coin boost again with event buildings. Their main output is coins. So don't go for the St. Mark's Basilica as well. And finally, this is the last stage I will be covering in this part of the video, the Layton Eligius. This is even easier from my point of view because it looks, or it feels, exactly the same as a High Middle Ages, only that's an age later. Now, this can very easily be seen first of all with the provinces. As you can see, pretty much the same as the High Middle Ages. However, there are some bonus provinces. This is due to a development in the story of your historical missions, if you care about those. Not really for me, but well, if you care, you have a nice story, I guess. The residential buildings are the same. Production buildings are even more standard. Look at this: 3x3, another 3x3, and a 3x4, which is not that different. And as for the units, they feel almost the same. They are not exactly as compact as in the High Middle Ages, but they all still fall either 3x3 or a 3x4 size. And finally, for the great buildings, the St. Basil's Cathedral is a great building you should not go for. It looks like it's a good building, at least something that is worth it, but it definitely isn't because it only focuses on your defensive army. Which I've discussed previously, is something that is definitely not worth it. And finally, the Castle del Monte is one of the best grid buildings around. It offers you attack boost, attack and defensive boost for your attacking army, and it offers you force points. And so that was the first part in a three-part series that I'll be making about the Age in Forge of Empires. Next time it'll be from the colonial age all the way up to the contemporary era.